what would your bosses at Midwestern Baptist Theological Seminary, what would they say to you if you started preaching too much in your classes? And then also, what would the elders at your church say if you started teaching too much in the pulpit?
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good question. In one sense, I don't think my bosses here at Midwestern would mind if I preached a lot in my classes because we serve the local church. And so maybe that would turn into you're not giving them enough depth or something like that. I don't know. But actually, I don't think there would be a major issue there. They would probably say, that's great because you're getting them excited about the text. And because our tagline is for the church. In one sense, I think they'd say, oh, that's just his style. And I honestly, I've taken classes from people who basically they get up and they preach a sermon for their lectures. And I found those classes like great. Now, there's other classes that I really love that they didn't do that. And it was a little more lecture based and discussion based. So I don't think there'd be a major problem there. I do wonder at church, though, one thing I'm trying to show students, we have a lot of students at our church. But one thing I am trying to show students is that there is a difference and that probably they would come to me and say, hey, this isn't a seminary classroom, so stop talking about the new perspective on Paul or whatever you're talking about. Like, this is supposed to reach people that aren't in seminary. This is supposed to reach people who work their 40-hour a week, blue collar job and have never thought about, they've heard what justification means in sermon, but they've never thought about like different views of justification or whatever it is, right? I think there could be more issues in the church because I do think people who I train, there's a tendency to maybe reproduce the classroom experience when I just don't think you're trying to reproduce the classroom experience. It is supposed to be a training ground from which you then hopefully preach a message that will reach everyone. That's part of, you didn't ask this, but I think part of the ways I've probably changed in preaching over the years is I really try to keep it simple. I try to take kind of C.S. Lewis's tack that you can have depth with simplicity and just don't overcomplicate what doesn't need to be overcomplicated. But in the midst of that, I think there's probably a depth to what I'm saying that those who have never heard some of this stuff before could get this. And then those who have heard it understand like, okay, there's way more underneath of this. And so for me, that's just, again, this past sermon was how to keep going. That's a message on perseverance. It's on endurance. It's on the race that is set before us. And I could have used a bunch of Christianese language to do that. But I just was like, let's use language that everybody's going to understand. How do you keep going in the Christian life? And I did speak of perseverance, but I didn't use that as my title because I thought, not everyone knows what perseverance is. And that's fine. You can use those terms and teach those terms. But I just try to keep it as simple as possible so that, if we have someone who, and actually there were people at our church that Sunday who hadn't been in church in a while, and I don't know when the last time they were in church, and I hope they walked out and were like, I understood that. So yeah, that's one way. I just try to keep it as simple as possible. But that is not at the exclusion of depth.